It's March 2026, and I'm outside a museum dedicated to the man who created the Palladian style of architecture and helped design much of the city of Vicenza. Located in the Veneto in northern Italy, the city of Vicenza is inextricably linked to the architecture of Andrea Palladio, and I'm starting my discovery of a man and his work at the Palladio Museum, housed, fittingly, in one of the many palazzos that Andrea designed. In this case, the Palazzo Barbaran de Porto, built between 1570 and 1575. The museum houses a number of models of some of Andrea's most important buildings. Andrea di Pietro della Gondola was born on the 30th of November 1508 in Padua. His father, Pietro, was a miller. When he was 13, his father arranged for him to be an apprentice stonecutter for a period of 6 years in the workshops of noted sculptor Bartolomeo Cavazza di Sossano, whose works had included the altar in the Basilica del Carmine in Padua. The working conditions were harsh, and in April 1523, Andrea fled the workshop and went to Vicenza, though he was later forced to return to complete his contract. In 1524, with his contract complete, he moved permanently to Vicenza, where he would live for most of his life. He would become an assistant to a prominent stonecutter and stonemason, Giovanni di Giacomo di Polezza, and at the same time joined the Guild of Stonemasons and Bricklayers. His early career was unexceptional until at the age of 30 he was employed by the humanist poet and scholar Gian Giorgio Trissino to rebuild his residence, the Villa Trissino at Cricoli, just north of Vicenza. Trissino would become his first patron and supporter. In 1540, Andrea would receive the formal title of architect, and the following year he would travel with Trissino to Rome to see the classical monuments firsthand. He took further trips with Trissino to Rome from the autumn of 1545 to early 1546, and a further trip in 1546 to 47. Trissino exposed Andrea to the history and arts of Rome, from which he would draw inspiration for his future buildings. It was also Trissino who gave Andrea the name by which he would be known, Palladio, an allusion to the Greek goddess of wisdom, Pallas Athene. The word Palladio means wise one. Around this time, he also worked on one of his most important buildings, the Basilica Palladiana, the palace of the city government of Vicenza. Trissino died in 1550, but the same year Palladio gained a new patron in powerful Venetian aristocrat Daniele Barbaro, who introduced the architect to the major aristocratic families of northern Italy, who would go on to support Palladio's career through the commissioning of a series of magnificent villas and palaces in the city. A member of the Olympic Society of Vicenza, his last work was to design the Teatro Olimpico for the society, with the construction of the design starting in February 1580, though Andrea didn't get to see its completion, as he died on the 19th of August that year, and is buried in the Church of Santa Corona in the city. Just the next block over from the Palladio Museum is another example of Andrea's work in the Palazzo Thiene. A Gothic palace had existed on the site since around 1490, but in the early part of the 1540s, the then owners of the palace, brothers Marc Antonio and Adriano Thiene, began a grandiose remodel of their family palace. The brothers were rich, powerful, and belonged to the grand Italian nobility, moving with ease amongst Europe's most important courts, and they therefore required a domestic stage to show off their wealth and meet the expectations of their noble guests who might pop in for a visit. Works on the remodelling were initially undertaken by Giulio Romano in 1542, but Andrea Palladio took over and started to revise the plans during the construction in 1544, taking full control of the project with the death of Romano in 1546. Consequently, the building is a mishmash of styles, with much of the ground floor attributed to the style of Giulio, and the upper floors are works of Andrea. Work on the building proceeded very slowly, and despite starting in 1542, dates on the external facade suggest completion around 1556, and on the courtyard 2 years later. In fact, the full grand project was never fulfilled, as Adriano died in 1552, and when Marcantonio's son Julio became the Marchese, the family's attention shifted from Vicenza to Ferrara, some 80 kilometres to the south. As a result, only a portion of the project was ever realised, and today, rather than filling a whole city block, the palazzo occupies just the northeastern corner and courtyard of the block. After passing through various hands, the building was owned by the Banco Popolare di Vicenza when, following a declaration of insolvency by the European Central Bank on June 23, 2017, it was liquidated and its assets sold to Intesa San Paolo for a symbolic 50 cents. In 2021, Intesa San Paolo sold the building to the municipality of Vicenza, who then worked on opening up the palazzo to the public, and today it forms part of the civic museum network. The palazzo has been adapted into a gallery and displays a number of works from the city's collection in rooms across the ground and first floor, which are accompanied by the impressive ceilings of many of the rooms. With perhaps the most impressive being the cylindrical corner room with its elaborate dome that occupies the northeastern corner of the property. Not part of Andrea's work, but on both the ground and the first floor are Mannerist fireplaces designed by Trentino sculptor Alessandro Vittoria around 1553. The fireplaces, reproducing an adaptation of the mouth of Hades, were widespread around northern Europe at the time of installation. The roof space on the upper floor houses changing collections, and at the time of visiting had a number of sculptures. There is also access here to the roof space above the corner dome, so you can see how a domed roof was able to fit into a very square building. If the Palazzo Thiene represents the works that Palladio took over from others and worked on, then Palazzo Chiericati represents pure Andrea. Asked to design a city centre palazzo and noble residence for his court by Count Girolamo Chiericati, Palladio completed the designs in 1550, with building works commencing the following year. The family must have been impressed by Andrea's work, as a few years later Girolamo's brother, Giovanni, commissioned Palladio to build the family's country home, the Villa Chiericati, located around 5 kilometres outside the city. In 1546, Girolamo had inherited some old houses and land overlooking the so-called Piazza dell'Isola, or Island Square, an open space at the eastern end of the city, which owed its name to being surrounded on two sides by two of the city's rivers. As the original houses were quite small, Girolamo had asked the city council if he could have a strip of about 4.5 metres of municipal land in front of his properties so he could have a portico, guaranteeing to make the portico available to the public. The city council granted his request in 1551, at which point construction works immediately started, for once following the argument that it's better to ask permission rather than seek forgiveness. However, work ceased in 1557 with the death of Girolamo, and his son limited his involvement to just the decoration of the internal rooms. The palace remained unfinished for over a century, with works only finally finishing in 1680, though by then Palladio was so well respected that his drawings were followed exactly. Works completed on the building almost exactly a century following Palladio's death. The municipality of Vicenza purchased the palace from the family in 1839 with the intention of converting it to a gallery to display the civic art collection. Restoration works, again keeping to the original designs of Andrea, were completed, and the Civic Museum was inaugurated on the 18th of August 1855. Further extensions have subsequently been added to the original building, generally being in Palladian style but not part of the original plans that Andrea had created. During the 19th century, the museum received large bequests from noble families of the city, including several masterpieces and a large collection of drawings by Palladio. The collection had grown to include a wide range of pieces from paintings and sculptures to natural history and archaeological artefacts. So in 1991, following the restoration of the cloisters of Santa Corona, the natural history and archaeological collections were relocated there, allowing more space for the art collection. Today, the Museo civico di Palazzo Chiericati is still carrying out the remit it was given when the municipality purchased it from the family, as it houses one of the most prestigious collections of paintings, sculpture and applied arts from the 13th to 20th centuries, and is the centrepiece of the city's civic museum network. Almost opposite the Palazzo Chiericati is one of Palladio's most famous works, and his final commission, the Teatro Olimpico. Palladio was a founding member of Accademia Olimpica when it was created in 1555, and had designed a number of temporary theatre structures of them in various locations in the city. In 1579, the Academy obtained the rights to build a permanent theatre in the site of an old fortress, the Castello del Territorio, which had been previously used as a prison and powder magazine before it had fallen into disuse. The first and oldest fully enclosed permanent indoor theatre of the modern era. There is speculation that some theatres in classical civilizations may have had enclosures, but there is no evidence. The Teatro Olimpico effectively set the blueprint for the design and development of theatres and theatrical spaces ever since its completion, 5 years after Andrea's death. Along with the Basilica Palladiana, the Teatro Olimpico is ranked as one of Palladio's finest works. Faced with an awkward-shaped site, Palladio opted to recreate the structure of Roman theatres that he had closely studied, but in order to fit in both the stage and seating area into the wide, shallow space, Andrea needed to flatten the semicircular seating of the traditional Roman theatre into an ellipse. Following Andrea's death in August 1580, just 6 months after construction started, his son Silla took temporary charge of the project, with the works then being taken over by Vincenzo Scamozzi, a task he would repeat on several more of Palladio's projects that were left unfinished with his passing. Aside from a single sketch, Palladio had left no plans for what kind of scenery was to be used on stage, so once again Scamozzi stepped in and designed the wooden stage sets, which were renowned for their perspective illusionism and attention to detail. The sets were built especially for the inaugural show Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, which premiered on the 3rd of March 1585. Despite being made from wood and stucco and originally just for use in the initial performance, the sets were never removed and have been preserved to the present day. Over the centuries, the theatre has been used not just for theatrical performances, but also for celebrations, tournaments and ceremonies, and the theatre has played host to Gotha, Napoleon, Emperor Francis I, King Victor Emmanuel II, and Giuseppe Garibaldi. In 1813, under a confiscation decree from Napoleon, the theatre passed into the hands of the municipality of Vicenza, who have owned and looked after the site ever since. The theatre underwent restoration between 1986 and 1987, and even to today continues to be used for classical performances and concerts, though due to fears of damaging its delicate structures, it's never been equipped with air conditioning and has a limited capacity of 470, so it's not the most comfortable of venues. If the Teatro Olimpico represents the greatest of Palladio's later works, then the triumph of his earlier career is the Basilica Palladiana, located in the city's central square, the Piazza dei Signori. The Palazzo della Regione was the building where justice was administered in the city and had originally been built in the mid-15th century. However, Palladio's redesign of the building added the white marble loggias with Serlian arches to the original Gothic construction. The Palazzo della Regione's upper floors is occupied by a single giant hall that has no internal support columns, the Hall of the Council of the 400. The roof, shaped like an inverted ship's hull, is covered in coppered sheets and was inspired by Padua's Palazzo della Regione. Between 1481 and 1494, works took place to surround the palace with a double loggia, but just 2 years after the end of construction, the southwest corner collapsed and was never repaired. For over 40 years, the city debated methods for reconstruction, with all of the best architects in the region looking at the problem. The last architect to make suggestions was Julio Romano, who in 1542 suggested raising the level of the rear Piazza della Erba up to the same level as the building to create a large symmetrical square with the building in the centre, removing an entire floor on the southwest side. However, in March 1546, the council decided to put its trust in a 38-year-old local architect, Andrea Palladio. The fact that Gian Giorgio Trissino, Palladio's patron, was on the committee is just pure coincidence. There were 3 further years of discussion before definitive approval was given to Andrea's project, with nobles Girolamo Chiericati and Alvis Valmarana expressing their strong support. The fact both subsequently had their own family palaces built by Palladio is again just pure coincidence. Construction was slow, with the first floor of the northern and western arcades only completed in 1561. The second level started in 1564 and took to 1597 to be completed, some 17 years after Palladio's death. The final facade on the Piazza dell'Erba wasn't completed until 1614. Palladio himself was instrumental in the renaming of the building, calling his redesigned Palazzo della Rione, surrounded by the new stone loggia, as a basilica, in homage to the structures of ancient Rome where politics were discussed and business was conducted in the basilica. The basilica was a turning point in Palladio's career, with him becoming the architect of the city of Vicenza, responsible for grandiose work without equals in the 16th century Venetian Republic. In fact, it may have been an early peak, as it wouldn't be until the 1560s and his plans for the Church of San Giorgio Maggiore in Venice that he would have a project of such magnitude again. The Basilica project also set Palladio and his family up for life, as he would receive a monthly salary of 5 ducats every month for the rest of his life as the works dragged on, giving him a constant source of income. Based on the gold content of the Venetian ducat, this would equate to an annual salary of around €80,000. That would happily keep most modern Italian architects in Saabs and roll-neck jumpers. On March 18, 1945, the basilica was severely damaged during a bombing raid, despite the building being on the Anglo-American list of monuments that were not to be hit. An incendiary bomb destroyed the original roof of the basilica, which was rebuilt immediately after the war to its original form, though using then modern construction techniques involving reinforced concrete support arches. Between 2007 and 2012, major restoration works were carried out in the building, including reversing some of the interventions that were required in the post-war rebuild, replacing the reinforced concrete with laminated wood arches. Today, the Basilica is part of the Civic Museum system, with the main hall housing changing exhibits. The changeover from one exhibition to another taking place while I was visiting, as well as granting access to the upper floors of the loggia for views out over both the Piazza dei Signori and the Piazza della Erba. Vicenza is located on the main Milano to Venezia railway line, with frequent local services to Venice and Verona, and Eurocity and high-speed Freccia services across northern Italy and into Switzerland and southern Germany. Night trains provide links to Rome and as far as Germany and Austria. Aeroporto di Venezia Marco Polo is the sixth busiest airport in Italy, with links across Europe and North Africa, with a full suite of low-cost and full-service airlines, as well as seasonal links to North America, the Middle East and Far East.